But do UX designers make more money than architects?
She thinks so. I mean, she said starting salary.
She'll find out.
I know. She told me like starting salary is $80,000, and I'm like, wow. Okay.
Oh, okay.
I don't know about that. I mean, hopefully it's true. If that's the case, then maybe we should all.
I know we should all go back to school. It's actually worth it.
I want to know if UX is such a big thing, why there's so much shit interface design.
Right? I know. It's a good question, actually, because it's just like there's so much garbage out there. It's true. Yep. Yeah. I was asking actually about your graphic too. We were Marina and I were talking
about poor graphics.
No, but it's good. It's fun. I mean, I like the one that's actually behind you. That's like the kind of like disco era neon. No, down right there. Yeah.
Yeah, that one was done that was episode 5.
Yeah.
We started this. We wanted to have some kind of graphic, and we didn't want to use our faces, so I sketched out this little dude, and then it was like, well, if we make a social media announcement, we have to post something. We can't just post the same cover every week.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So in the beginning, I was doing kind of variations, like some of these, but of course, doing the podcast and working full time, like less and less time went into the graphics. So some of them were like really, really terrible. I've had to remove. And then eventually it wasn't sustainable. It's like, how many variations on a face, a cartoon face can I do?
Yeah.
You actually did a bunch.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah. And after a few of them, I'm like, okay, this has got to stop. But if you figure out other things to do for the cover.
That's good.
So, was this the first time that you went back to New York since being here?
It was actually, yeah.
Was that kind of surreal?
Definitely. I mean, and for a bunch of months, people kept saying to me like, "Are you going to miss New York? Are you going to miss New York?" And I'm like, I have no idea. Like, I'm here now, so I'm enjoying this, and I'm, like San Francisco is a totally different place, and I'm just going to like understand that and get into it and indulge in it and understand it. And so when I went, I was like, okay, now is the time I'm going to find out. And a bunch of things I wasn't able to do. Like, I couldn't stay in my own apartment, obviously, because I'm renting it. So that was a little bit awkward. And
I actually in the city.
Yeah, exactly. Like staying in a hotel in New York City. But actually, like, I realized like this is what it does feel like to be a tourist. And so it was kind of fun to actually be a tourist in New York. And did you stay in like Times Square? No, I should have.
Above the M&M store. That'd be the ultimate.
Yeah, right.
No, you can't do that.
No, I had to. No, I stayed in the Lower East Side.
Nice,
right? Because I was like, where would I want to stay if I lived in New York? Or where would I want to live now? Kind of thing. So, a friend of mine, Nancy Kim. I met Nancy, right? She's been working for Ace Hotels for a while. Atelier Ace is like their in-house design staff. And so they just did a new hotel called Sister City, which is on Bowery, like the same block as the new museum. And it was actually like really nice. It's super cool. Yeah. It's the rooms are tiny. Everything's like minimally furnished. And the whole idea is it's kind of like their down market brand in a way.
Right.
But on the other hand, like Bjork's choir was staying there, so because she was doing those performances at the Shed, and so
at the Shed,
the Diller Scofidio Renfro project, yeah, / David Rockwell.
I didn't realize that he was involved.
Yeah, apparently.
Okay.
Yeah, I had a friend who went to see the show, and I asked her like, so was it Diller Scofidio or was it David Rockwell? And she said David Rockwell had something to do with it. Right. So, yeah.
Poor guy.
I know. Oh, he's got enough.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So
it's the same thing with the Highland itself. It's like, oh, DSR did. Well, no, there was James
Corner. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Field operations.
See, I don't even know his name.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, have you ever seen, I asked this question of everyone because a friend of mine is a documentary filmmaker, and he's made a whole lot of really great like design films and art films and stuff like that. And the guy who did the plantings, so I guess he's kind of a botanist basically, but not really a scientist, but more of a an artist. Designed the plantings for the High Line. His name is Piet Oertzen, and he's Dutch. Obviously,
that's a great name.
Yeah, and he did. So my friend did a movie called The 5 Seasons, and it kind of it centers around his workshop outside of Amsterdam, and kind of where he does his work and kind of develops his ideas and concepts, and and to kind of work through him kind of designing and then planting and then having an opening for like a Hauser and Wirth gallery outside of London, I guess, or something. But the way he kind of shows the timeline through how the High Line kind of goes through its seasons, it kind of makes sense all of a sudden. Because, I remember the first time kind of walking the High Line, it was cool, it was green, it was beautiful. And then in the wintertime, it was like a lot of brown and a lot of this like rusty colors and,
right.
Grays and silvers. And I thought, why don't they clean that up?
It's weeds, it's maintenance.
Exactly. But now I know that it's actually meant to do that.
Right, right.
They actually like specifically want it to look like something in the winter rather than barren landscape. So it was cool.
It's kind of how I feel about San Francisco right now. Like when we drive by the Lake Merced.
Yeah.
Lake Merced. And
okay.
I'm like, okay, I mean, I get the whole like natural looking park, like let's not trim it and all that, but it's at the same time like, come on guys, let's just trim it a little bit.
Right.
Like,
But so how was the concert / the shed through?
Oh, well, she said it was really amazing. She said that what was so interesting was that they didn't open it. So you were in a conventional like feeling theater space. And it's pretty small. I think it's actually 2 theaters. And I guess that what happens is that when they open it, like one of the theaters slides away along with it. So it becomes a much larger venue that way.
I see.
So it might be that like it's sort of 2 tiers stacked like this, and then as they pull one out, or like trying to get the architecture right, but basically one becomes the balcony for the other. Right?
I see.
So yeah,
I haven't looked too much into it. In part because I think when Hudson Yards more or less first opened, there was a lot of shine to it, and everyone was really interested. And then immediately there's a lot of articles by the urban design architecture communities just hating on everything that was built there, and I haven't since then I haven't bothered to look and to see what's going on.
Yeah, and it's there's a lot of really awful things about it for sure, and sorry, even the shed, like from the outside, like it's because of the way, well, it's a theater, and so like any other theater, it has no presence, it has no street presence, and so it's just kind of this like beautiful skin. So architecturally, it's interesting, but as a kind of urban gesture, like that whole plaza is so dominated by that Heatherwick thing that like everything else is kind of background to it. And it's like, it's the same old problem. It's a modernist kind of, approach where you stick a sculpture in the middle of it and assume that that's going to be the attractor. And right now it is. But who knows? I mean, who knows how long people are going to be willing to actually pay money to walk into that thing?
It costs money to go into it?
Well, at least you have to get tickets. It might just be about timing. I didn't go. I mean, I walked up and I was like, oh, you have to get a ticket. Oh, well, that's too bad.
I mean, I've heard also that it's that the Heatherwick project feels so suffocated in a way. I mean, I've not been there. I haven't been back to New York since we left, but that it's surrounded by so many big buildings that it seems it's very awkward, the whole space. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's very true. It's an interesting, and they're still missing like half of the space too. I mean, because at least I assume like there's this sort of awkward kind of abrupt end to it. And I think that it's supposed to continue. There's like a whole second neighborhood that's going to eventually get built further west. Or at least because right now what you do is you kind of, when you're at the Heatherwick and you look towards the Hudson River, there is literally like this horizon line and it just drops off into nothingness. And so when you walk over there, you realize, I guess that's 12th Avenue, that, the relationship to 12th Avenue is again, like so many of these mega kind of developments like that, even like the World Trade Center, it's like they never quite figured out that edge and how they really relate to the street. And so it's just a series of stairs that leads down there. And it's like, you're just kind of like, okay, do I go in? Is this the right way to go? I can't tell, whereas on 11th Avenue, it's like the mall, right? Come on in.
Right.
So, the most interesting place actually is the corner of, it's probably 29th Street, 28th Street, and 11th Avenue. like where the first KPF building went up, and that's the one building that kind of comes to the ground on the street level.
Yeah.
And as they opened up that side street, I think it's 29th, all of the storefronts underneath the High Line kind of open up. It's one of those problems that Emily Moss used to teach, probably still teaches to the interior design students, where the storefront on that side street underneath the High Line is then becomes a double height space behind the High Line, and so making that connection up to the plaza level is kind of like the design problem.
The kind of L-shaped block.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so they did this interesting thing, sort of, which is that they kind of turned it into a series of different restaurants and shops and stuff like that are all related to the rest of the mall. So you can actually like walk in and eventually find your way into the mall from there. And there's like a food court basically, but it's this very high end like Spanish food court. It's like the Spanish version of Italy, right? So
of course it would be.
Right. I mean, because like, you know, the Italian thing's played out, so let's try Spain. But what's nice about it, though, is that it does at least kind of invert that corner, and it kind of brings the public into that.
That must have opened up fairly recently, right?
I was going to say,
yeah. It seems like it was all brand new, like just 2 months ago or so. Yeah. So
yeah, that KPF tower is
the one
huge.
with the deck.
The one that you don't like.
Oh, it's so stupid.
I don't know why you don't like it.
Oh, the one with the deck, though, man, that's
with the triangle
crazy. All
deck
the way up.
sticking.
Yeah.
It's a giant building. This giant triangle deck.
I used to have meetings every Thursday near that area, and every time I would walk over there, I'd be like, "This is so stupid."
Well, what's your problem with the deck?
It looks silly.
No.
It looks like a little baseball cap
like
or
a visor?
something. Yeah.
David, did you work on it?
Let's talk about it.
I did not work on that tower, but I have to represent previous employers.
Okay.
I think it's a good. It's just not.
I think you would have been fine without it, but that's me.
It's so funny because like we agree on certain things, but other things we just totally disagree. Like KPF is a firm that I've always respected, especially their earlier work. She was like totally against their work. I'm like, what are you talking about? It's not like the most groundbreaking work, especially now, but it's still good.
Sure.
No,
okay. I like.
Can you help us with?
I know. Well, I'm gonna say there's one KPF building that I like really admire and like look at and just say I wish I could have done that. Which is it's also in New York. It's a residential building. It's short and it's curvy. It's like at the corner of like 8th Avenue and 14th Street. Yeah.
It's in a weird intersection.
Yeah,
right.
Where it's kind of triangulated and there's a little park there and stuff like that. That's a really nice little building.
It's really, really strange. And before I knew it was done by KPF, when I was a newbie to New York City, I would walk by it and think, what an ugly, ugly building. But the more I walked by it, the more I realized it's actually a really interesting proposal for that site.
Yeah.
I don't know
There's a Starbucks at the bottom of it.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It's basically like it's metal and glass, and the metal is black, and it's really curvy, and each floor is slightly offset from the other one.
Right.
It's composed of like ribbons.
Yeah, and every once in a while you get these really weird, but really kind of, I think, nicely resolved. Because, I mean, my problem always with architecture is that I look at the details. And if I think the details are good, then I'm like, I don't care what it looks like. It's really nice. so sorry.
And the details are bad?
No, in that building, they're really nice because they're like these really incredible resolutions of these moments where like things shouldn't line up, and so they don't. And then it's like really nice. And you're like, great. It's like they've solved some of those problems that, you know, a lot of like contemporary architecture has a really hard time with. Like, you know, the layering of floors in a way that kind of expresses the layering by kind of shifting and stuff like that. Like one of the buildings that I'm working on in LA right now, the base building architect is Gensler. And another building they did for the same client is like that. And it's just like, oh my God, there's so many mistakes in all the details. I just look at it every time and I cringe. And I'm like,
design mistakes.
Did they know what they were doing? You know? Yeah. Design mistakes. Yeah.
It's weird because that kind of project has been done many times, I feel like. And it is rare to see one done well, or in a way that at least stands out from all of the rest. The kind of ribbon facade and like shifted glass panels, it's a thing we've all seen a million times, but I think that corner I don't know if it's on a corner. It feels like it's on a corner. It is on a corner.
Yeah.
It's on a corner.
Yeah, but it's not a 90-degree angle. It's like obtuse, I guess.
Right? Yeah. And it works really well in that situation. It's kind of like a non-building in a way. It doesn't present itself as like a corner piece of the intersection. It kind of fades. Right. It's really bizarre. Yeah, it's really strange.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good way.
What about the Jean Nouvel project on the High Line? Do you know the one that has it's like a bajillion windows that are?
The one that was built like maybe
it's a while ago,
7 or 8 years ago. Yeah, I mean that really drives me nuts because that whole way that the corner, it's the same thing in a way that like. If it's going to be facade, make a facade. If it's not supposed to be facade, like I don't want you to tell me that. Like in a way, like right. I feel like that's the thing that drives me nuts is that you read so much of the infrastructure that's holding up all of those windows at the corner that you're just kind of like oh God, like there had to be a way to make that more elegant, or else just don't do it. That was kind of my feeling about it. Because I think that like it's also interesting as a sort of opportunity to kind of deal with all four facades because it sort of stands alone, to kind of like say like that intersection is the only one that matters, and then the back of the building is kind of like the black version of it, but then it doesn't sort of. I feel like it's not volumetric, and maybe that's exactly what they were trying to do, and I'm missing the point in a way that it's kind of it's planar on one side and it's a solid volume on the other, and that's that in itself can be a really interesting investigation, but yeah, I just feel like then how you deal with that plane and how you deal with that surface, it's just fragmented so much that then the fragments are kind of forced into this sort of structure that has to hold it all together, and then that structure becomes so apparent and so much a part of the composition. But it doesn't work with it. It works against it. It's kind of constantly fighting.
Yeah. So, yeah. So going way back then, I've always been curious. How did you first get into architecture?
Well, so if I go back to high school,
yeah, we go further back than that.
I know. Well,
as a child, did you play with the Legos or something?
No. Well, actually, if we go all the way back to childhood. I was a kid. I grew up in Massachusetts, and my parents were both like when I was first born, they were living in Cambridge, and then we moved to like a pretty rural part of the state. But then we would go into Boston and Cambridge almost every weekend because they didn't want to. They only lived out there basically because it was cheap, So my dad was a writer, or is a writer, and so he was like, I can't afford to live in the city, and. There's a lot in that. I can unpack that one for a little while. I'll pause on that for a sec.
Okay, we'll return to it.
Yeah. But one of the places we used to go to when I was a kid was a Cambridge 7 building. I didn't know that at the time. Called at the time it was a company called Design Research, or DR. It was a furniture store, and it was started. I don't know who started it, but it kind of had that Conrad's quality to it. Like it was all very modern furniture, but the building was super cool, and it still exists today. And I think it's actually a landmark in Cambridge now. It was concrete and glass, and the glass was all cast into the building. Like if I think about the detail now, I'm like, how did they actually build that? They must have, but it had rounded corners. So it had rounded glass corners, and it's probably like 1/4-inch glass too. It's like super light and very energy inefficient and all the terrible things that,
and the perfect weather condition to have single pane 1/4-inch glass.
But I used to go there as a kid, and my parents would like go shopping and looking around and looking at things. It was kind of the IKEA of its day in a way, but like much better, higher design. And I think that they bought like knockoff Breuer chairs there too, and stuff like that. But they had, but I would like just go there and basically like hang out and like sit in one of those rounded corners for like a half an hour while they were shopping, just like touching the concrete, and touching the glass and being like this, just like, this is whatever. I like this, I was drawn to it. So
how old were you when you were doing this?
Like 8.
Really?
Yeah, like a really young kid. And so it just I don't know, whatever. That at the time it didn't mean anything to me, but I think like it had an influence for sure, because like I'm still drawn to like, I went to the Toledo Glass Museum a bunch of years ago, and I was like, oh my God, this is the same place, But anyway, when I was in high school, I started studying. I started doing like art projects. I kind of got involved. I went to a pretty artsy high school, and so got involved in theater and different design venues, like, and art stuff. And so I went to Parsons undergrad. And
so you did theater in high school?
Yeah. I did set design and lighting design and a little tiny bit of acting, but...
Oh, so, okay, I was going to say behind stage or on stage?
No, yeah, backstage. Yeah.
And you didn't pursue the acting career?
No.
I'm very curious.
Although I did once, the same friend who makes the documentary films, Tom Piper, called me up one day and said, hey, so my neighbor is doing a little industrial film. Would you be interested in being my buddy in the industrial film? And I was like, sure, what's it for? And he said, Jameson whiskey. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So we spent a day like shooting this, and he's the star, but like I'm like his sidekick, and we're like cooking together, and a couple girls show up for dinner, and we like drink Jameson together, and we're having a gay old time. It's like super fun,
When was this?
This was like 6 years ago.
That's not that long ago.
I know.
Wait, so is this video like online on Netflix?
Netflix.
I don't know.
No, it was, so what it was for was, I guess when brands kind of market a new product, and there was like this special Jameson Gold. It was like the smoother version of Jameson whiskey. Because if you've ever had Jameson whiskey, it's really good, but it's like pretty harsh stuff. They to sell it to their distributors, they like have they have conventions and stuff, and then they run these industrial films during the conventions to get people to. So so that's what it was for.
So did the sales go up after you did that?
I think good question. But it was actually kind of fun, and the filmmaker was like afterwards, he's like, you should have started doing this when you were younger, because actually you're pretty good at it.
Really?
Yeah. So I was like, oh well, missed opportunity. But anyway, so all right, so I go to Parsons, and while I'm there, and it's really funny, I'm going to describe a conversation I had with one of my teachers. And like a month after I moved here, I met a guy who was at Parsons at exactly the same time as me and had exactly the same conversation, which was, so when you're in first year at Parsons, you're in foundation and you're doing all kinds of different things. And so I had a painting teacher. So we actually at that time they had like painting class, which was great fun. And I was very excited because that's what I wanted to do. And over the course of the semester, my teacher was like, you're okay, but you're not really that good at this. And she said, eventually, she finally said, look, this takes a lot of effort. It's a really hard thing to do. And I don't know that you really have the temperament for it. And I was like, okay. I mean, wow. I'm only like 17, but okay. Yeah. Like, so what do you think? I mean, do you have any other suggestions? And she said, you might be interested in that architecture thing. Like, you should go see that. You should go see what those guys do, because it's really interesting. And I think that you might be like, that might be more your speed. And so this other guy had the same conversation, but, stick the word graphic design in there instead of the word architecture.
Really?
Yeah. So, and it's kind of interesting because we both sort of realized like, she was actually really helpful. It's really harsh tokes at the time. I was just kind of like, oh my God, like this my whole life I've been training for this.
And you wanted to do painting. That was your initial kind of
totally.
passion?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, especially when I first started getting into art, and I did a summer program at Parsons, and color theory just blew my mind. I was like, wow, I I had no idea this existed. I had no idea that people actually think about this. And I had no idea that this guy, Joseph Albers, is around and like, you know, all that stuff. And it was like the program was still very much Bauhaus based. So everything we did was like Bauhaus training. And
That's
so we
pretty
literally did Joseph Albers studies. And first we did them in paper and then we did them in paint.
I'm not familiar. What are those studies?
Oh, okay. So Albers was the color theorist at the Bauhaus. And eventually when he moved to the U.S., he ended up at Yale, I think it was, which is part of the reason I think why the Yale Fine Arts program is still super top, you know, really great program. But what he did all these investigations into the ways in which colors respond to each other and then the ways in which we perceive that relationship. So, within the program of color theory, you would go through like understanding, you know, just the basics to start with: complementary colors, contrasting colors, and so on. And sort of how does the color wheel work? And then we had these boxes of like called color aid paper, and they were basically silk screened sheets of paper, and you would take them and you would X-Acto blade cut them into squares and like make these little Joseph Albers style, you know, collages.
His mom just threw away hers from when she went to school.
I know the box. At least the one she had is about this big.
Yep.
And she made
exactly.
collage of like green over blue and how you perceive
the color
it.
paper, though, it's not some cheap stuff. It's almost like thin paint chip is what it feels like.
Yeah, and they are silk screened. So it's and the color is very true and very deep. It has a really good sort of quality to it. Yeah. Right. And so, you know, we would do all these exercises. So, you know, one week we would do like contrasting colors. And so you would take like, you would make a border of one color and put a color inside of it essentially, and then maybe do two of them side by side. And when you look at Albers paintings now, you'll see what I'm talking about. And sometimes you're sort of looking for ways in which the different hues sort of, you know, complement each other. But also sometimes you do studies where on the left side you do like blue and green, and then on the right side you do red and whatever the
orange.
Yeah, orange, right, exactly. So you'd see how they respond to each other, and then you take the orange and flip it over here, and take the green and put it over there, and see how those work together, right? And so it's about both the ways in which colors work together, but then also how color perception exists and resides in the eye, right? And sort of how we sort of understand that transmission of light to the eye through the color. So it's pretty interesting. And
that sounds much more so color theory is something I've heard about but never understood really. And when I was younger and less I don't know, open to other things, I just dismissed it because the only exposure I had was the first year of undergrad school, and we did a color wheel where you take like like colored pencils and you color it in, but that was like it.
Okay.
And I was like, well, but it was like the most basic, like here's red, here's orange, here's yellow, here's blue. I'm like, well, it was like a 1 week assignment, and I was like, this can't be, that's not very interesting at all.
Right. No, this was a semester long class.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Right.
See, that sounds
and
worthwhile.
as you sort of develop your skills, you go from collage to painting. And so as you're painting, you begin to really understand how you mix colors to create the color palette you're looking for. And so, you know, it's funny because I thought, this is great. This is all building towards, you know, me being a painter, because I was like, I'm really digging color theory. And she's like, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Well, from her perspective, you know, so that was probably part of it too, was like kind of how you're, you know, who are your mentors, who you're learning from, you know, obviously always can help direct the way in which you eventually kind of find your way. But by pointing me towards the architecture program, and this was like, you know, early spring semester, early enough that there were still a few lectures left. So, and back then the program was run by James Wines of Sight.
Yeah. He's a weird dude.
Is it Sight? Yeah.
Sight.
Yeah. Weird dude. Totally weird dude.
Have you seen, you've seen his stuff. He does, he's most well known for, hand-drawn stuff.
Yeah.
Is one of the things. And then he did a whole bunch of projects in the 70s.
Yeah.
That for Best.
Yeah.
It's a, Best was a, what do you call it? Not a grocery store.
But like a mega store.
Like a mega store.
Yeah.
like Walmart, but not Walmart. Mm-hmm. And he would do, it's like he would design the building so a corner of it looked like it was being deconstructed, but it was built that way. Yeah. Or he'd have a glass facade, and he'd have some of the items that you could purchase going through the facade. So on one side there was a bike, on the other side there was like a mold of the bike, like really, really strange stuff.
More like art.
Yeah,
exactly. Art.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh. Yeah. And he actually designed the first Shake Shack.
No kidding.
Yeah, the one that's in Madison Park. Yeah,
really?
Yeah. So, so he brought in a whole lot of really fascinating characters to the school, and also had he was just so well tied into the architecture community at that time that, so the first lecture I went to was Peter Eisenman. And, so like, I'm like, I don't know who this is. I don't know what he's talking about, but like the images are really cool, and I'm like, wow, that's architecture. Huh. That's fascinating. And that's like my first exposure to architecture. Cause of course I'm like buildings. Okay. Yeah. But like to kind of go into an architecture lecture completely unaware of what's going on. And then that's the first thing I see was made a real impression on me. Cause I also, I said I went to an artsy high school, but it was also a very intellectual high school, very kind of, very, very impressionable, very strong education, very, very, high end, hard for me to keep up with kind of education,
Right.
And,
as opposed to being just totally art based and subjective, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when I got to Parsons, I was like, design school is weird. Cause like, these people aren't really talking about things that I used to talk about all the time, like literature and, and even art, in a way that like, I thought like, this is what it's just gonna be intellectual discourse here, and I was like, oh, everybody's a designer and they all want to be in the fashion program. And they all kind of like think like, like I just want to make stuff. I don't care. I don't want to talk about it, kind of thing. So all of a sudden I go to the architecture program and everybody's like ponderous and thinking and working really hard and kind of doing all this kind of like, it just felt natural to me, especially after the theater thing, because so much of theater is about kind of, working late, because the designers and the stagehands have to work off hours because you're basically like you have to reinstall the show after everybody leaves. So your hours are just completely different from everyone else's. And so, I kind of get used to that and kind of seem normal to me that you're kind of like, and also it's always very hands-on. But that kind of the way in which that kind of intellectual discourse was happening, I was like, okay, I get it. That's impressive. That's really amazing. Maybe I really should do this. And then like that fall, the first lecture that happened was Rem Koolhaas. And I was like, wow, like that shit is crazy, And I was like, yeah. And it was like this kind of amazing thing. And yeah, I mean, that was definitely, those were the highlights. I mean, I think, but in New York at the time was kind of drawing all these really interesting people. So like I met Zaha at a party, and stuff like that. And I'm like, my teacher at the time like threw this party and said, you should come, you'll have fun. It'd be great, because we were publishing this magazine together. Like I was helping him publish this magazine in like the sub basement of a building on Mott Street.
It's so New York. It's so New York.
David Johansen's band like played on the floor above us. So like like their rehearsal studio. So like there were days where I was just like, hey, it's really loud in here. My boss was like, yeah, but they're really good, right? I was like, well, yeah, but like, how are we supposed to get anything done? But anyway, but it was, so that just, it drew me in so fast. I was like, okay, this makes so much more sense to me and I really get it. And like Alan Wexler was teaching at Parsons at the time and he was one of my first teachers.
How old is that guy? I know. He looks older, but he doesn't look that old.
He does like to tell me that like, he's like, when I was teaching you, you probably thought I was like 60 and I was only 35. I was like, oh, okay.
He's been in that 60 range for the past 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Definitely has the spirit of like a 25-year-old.
He does. Yeah.
But so I'm kind of surprised or intrigued that the discourse or lack thereof was so different between these two kinds of worlds. I mean, I guess I don't know why I would be surprised by that, but
I mean, I think that I've seen it as a teacher too, but I think that what I always found with the fine arts students especially was that and the teachers was that, like, when we were asked to present our work, for instance, it was more about talking about the thing that you're seeing on the wall rather than talking about how you arrived at that, say, for instance. So, that description of that object, was much more important. And so obviously, like, how much can you really say? It's like, it's there. You're looking at it. We're all looking at it together. Right. Like, the blue is blue. And like, I worked really hard to figure out how to get that blue as it is, It's like, okay. Whereas like in the architecture program, it was like, why did you do this? Right. How did you come up with this idea? Right. Where did it start? And all of these things. And I was like, oh, this is great. I get to actually talk about things that I care about, or else I was like, oh my God, I have no idea. Like, I don't know, but now I have to think about that, know? So, and then also just the emphasis on, well, actually one of the other people who was teaching at Parsons at the time was Sanford Quinter. Yeah. And he was like just out of school, I think, like he, so the guy is like intense and definitely like way above my level of ability in terms of like discourse. And as a young teacher, of course, he lorded that over us in a way that was made us like so attracted to him and so excited and just like so completely lost all the time when he would talk about stuff. But he did sort of help us to understand kind of the power of that relationship between, the language of the language of architecture and how it fit into the language of culture, and how you sort of started to kind of develop that understanding of why we did what we did. And I think that really helped a lot. I mean, one of the things, there were obviously a couple of like really serious strains of development in architecture going on at that time. The sort of growth of deconstructivism was happening. The way, so like, Peter Eisenman was kind of like, that was kind of his heyday, it was really like the beginning of when he was sort of really pushing for this idea of, as he was really beginning to transition into building, but not quite. So he was still very much in the kind of realm of paper architecture and the ways in which thinking about creating a visual or fabricated language of building and how it relates to the idea of the structure of language itself is like, is a thing to think about and a thing to kind of work on. And so many people kind of picked up on that at that time that, and Sanford to some extent was a part of that as well. But he was also really interested in the ways in which he was kind of, I think at the bedrock of his sort of thinking was very much about what is culture and how does architecture fit into that, and sort of how do we begin to kind of make sense out of that relationship. So like we watched movies in his class all the time, which was of course great and a nice like break from but then we had to write 20-page papers on why these movies matter related to architecture.
Just for studio,
well, no, this is a class on seminar. So but all of these things really these strands kind of started to tie together because kind of towards the end of my time at Parsons, now I'm blanking on his name. There was a really great kind of conceptual artist who then kind of switched into architecture. He died a couple of years ago. Kind of an Italian sounding name.
Yeah.
Blanking on it, but
it's not Liebskin. I know it's not Liebskin. It's
I wish.
Who would you just say?
I was waiting for your reaction.
I know what you're talking about. He did a lot. It's like very angular, totally crazy things. going through buildings. Is that what you're talking?
Oh no, not Levius Woods. Is that what you're saying?
That's what I'm thinking of.
No, I'm thinking of it'll come to me in a minute. But he was a conceptual artist. He did like probably one of his most famous art pieces in the 60s was called The Seed. And he like a bunch of artists had taken over one of the piers on the West Side, you know, at a time when New York was dying, and so you know you could just do that kind of thing. And you know this piece, right? So he built a wood floor into the space, but had it ramp up. So you didn't really notice it when you walked into the space because ever so slightly ramping up, and like it's a really big space. And what he would do is he would get underneath the floor and then very, very loudly fantasize about the person walking across the floor and masturbate.
What?
And, you know, and like this was like his thing, and that's why it was called The Seed, I guess, you know. I mean, I think it was like the seed of an idea as well as the seed he spilled during this like.
So that's how he died?
No.
I'm kidding.
But
he died doing what he loves.
But he came to teach at Parsons, and at first he taught a conceptual art class in the architecture program, and you know, so
I don't know if that'd be allowed now.
Yeah,
I know. No, you're right. Actually,
vetted.
Yeah.
Well,
so, but he was kind of one of the most famous artists of that era, and total kook, but an interesting kook. And actually, David Levin worked in his studio for a little while, like you know, in the 90s, when he did decide he really wanted to be an architect, because as the scale of his public art kind of grew, like, so he actually started to kind of realize like he needed to make things that had permanence. And as he started to think about that, he really thought a lot about scale and wanted to create environments that people could occupy, so that it's not just about him occupying them, but then other people as well. He also did a piece where like people would walk into the space and he'd be blindfolded and swinging a bat. And you had to like avoid him. So like, you know, you think about like Marina Abramovich, like, you know, it's like, you know, yeah, it's like you can see how she probably was very familiar with his work and kind of like could sort of start to kind of see how to shift it away from
in French,
the violence of it.
In art school, we learn those types of performance as being called happenings.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is that in the same way here?
Exactly. Yep. That's right. Yeah. So he was very much a part of that scene. But he taught this conceptual art class, and we as a group, he kind of had us work both in teams and then also individually on projects. And, but it was really interesting because like the way I described a fine arts program, where you're kind of just describing the piece that's in front of, you know, it's self-evident what the piece is about because it's right there. This gave me my opportunity to kind of like reflect back on that and begin to understand how, you know, the development of the way in which I think about design and think about making really transformed a lot, because all of a sudden, like, I'm being asked to make art. But because it's conceptual art, you know, like, you know, of course, for the first 3 weeks of the semester, we spent 3 weeks talking about what the heck that means. You know, why are we calling it conceptual? Why is it conceptual? Right. What's that coming from? But we really began to develop this idea that, you know, art with a concept has a way of engaging and understanding it that actually requires the viewer to like be much more actively involved in the process of looking at the work and sometimes actually being a part of it. So and that was what was interesting about the projects that we put together. Like this one guy who actually eventually became an artist and sort of has an art practice. He's based in Milan now. Did this one piece that we actually like, it was crazy. And like, at the time I was like, I really don't want to do this, but he basically made us all like strap our fingers into this like device. And then there were these like trigger like loaded X-Acto blades that flipped down and stopped just short of our fingers.
Oh wow!
I know. And he demonstrated it before. He's like, you won't get hurt. I promise you. but so we all did it. And it was actually like completely crazy. And it was like, yeah, right, exactly. But so we produced pieces like that. I can't even remember what I did for that class, but it was kind of an amazing way to, kind of flip back to looking at art and sort of, being involved in art practice again and sort of trying and understand it. So, I mean, these days, whenever I think about wanting to make art, I like, all I want to do is go back to that color theory stuff.
Well, so does any of that still influence your daily work that you do right now? Like the color or like that kind of conceptual thinking about projects?
I mean, the conceptual thinking for sure. I think that, so much of what I do now, for better and for worse, is not about the actual design itself anymore, but it is very much about the process. Yeah. And so, because I'm essentially a manager, and a detailer, which is kind of like the one chance, but it's all like sketching stuff for people, I think about process so much that the only way that I can help the people in the office who are doing the design work to kind of do it better is to really force them into understanding, kind of always going back to kind of where did we start? What's our, it's like the question you ask a student, what's your concept, right? Right. But like asking that in the office is actually always kind of an interesting opportunity to get people to really think, to just be so invested in kind of what they're doing in a way that really forces them to kind of be accountable to that concept and to kind of continually use it and push it within the work. So
to get them kind of on board or started earlier on in that kind of thinking, as opposed to just discussing the final thing.
I mean, and so the case that the project I'm working on now for this large media company, when we got to the point where we were finally like done with programming, like in programming in this case, it's just like, we need this many people to sit in this many desks and so on, and started to like conceptualize the project. Like, what is it about? We started kind of down the path that most interior design firms do, where you're like, what's the materiality? How do we kind of think about it? Where do we go with that? And, during one of those first meetings, I said, like, don't forget that this isn't let's say, I'm just trying to think, this isn't Google, right? It's not a tech company.
So
right?
It's not Google.
It's not Google. Their expectations are not the same, right? This is a company that's involved in telling stories, right? Mm-hmm. So how does a storyteller kind of like start to engage that? So we just kind of totally revisited or reinvented the way that we thought about kind of the way in which a person would experience the building. And so now it's very much, it's kind of episodic, right? And so the way in which you move through the spaces and the way in which you engage different kinds of spaces on different floors, it's going to have a different look and feel because it's going to be different characters. Like, so, and the ways in which these different characters interact will be kind of the thing that you experience as you go into, one open public space or, like a town hall or a different conference room or something like that. So, we have about 9 different floors that we're designing. And so each one of them has like a central like town hall space so that people can gather in there or just, have their lunch there or just hang out or whatever. And they'll be different, right? So it's like an introverted space as opposed to a, I forget, like vivacious and honest. And like we have these different, I know some of them are goofy, but when you think about it, they're like, they relate to like the way, well, I kept saying when we first started having this conversation, I was like, look, this is what it's like. It's like the Breakfast Club. Did you guys see the Breakfast Club?
No.
Okay. Oh my God. Really?
Try to, yeah. But...
Oh, okay. So the Breakfast Club, it's one of John Hughes's greatest movies.
There's too much stuff to watch. I'm trying to just keep up with the current things.
I know. So there's 5 or 6, I can't remember. It must be 6 because there's always coupling at the end.
Right. One lonely person.
Right. So there's 5 or 6 main characters, and they're all teenagers. They're all in high school, and the whole thing takes place during detention on a Saturday. And they're all required to go to detention on a Saturday. And so, of course, there's like, the angry, coach who has to like...
Who's in this movie?
Well, it's Ali Sheedy. Not Emilio Estevez. Yeah, it is. Emilio Estevez.
Okay, I've seen this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Judd Nelson.
Yeah.
So each one of them is like an archetype. They're each they're like really basic high school types. But I was like, that's what we're doing. That's actually exactly what we're doing with this project. And I said, it's just like the Breakfast Club. And they all look at them. They all look at me like, what's the Breakfast Club?
Yeah. Okay.
And I was like, okay, all right, I get it. And so I never talk about it anymore, except obviously I'm talking about it now. So I wanted to get it out there. No, that was my idea. No, I'm just kidding. But that was kind of a big part of the process was, to kind of really kind of reinvent the way in which, you typically think about like, how do you kind of develop materiality in an interior design project? It's usually like, let's make this room kind of sexy and let's make this room more like cool. And this one will be more lively and so on and so forth. And, so I think that's been a really interesting kind of part of that. And I think that does come out of that kind of some of those investigations. And I think that we, the firm I'm working for now, like, I think everyone develops a really strong sensibility about how, kind of material contrast versus material compatibility kind of really develops a different sensibility about a space. I think it's part of like one of the signatures of O+A in a way. Mm-hmm. I think that it comes through. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. So.
Well, I feel like also getting to approach any kind of project in that way is I don't know if it's rare, but it doesn't happen a lot of times in offices. It's like, because I think offices are so aware that there's, 95% of the work is going to happen after that thinking process. Mm-hmm. And we just kind of skip over that initial part in favor of just moving forward with things. And so that's kind of cool. You get to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been really interesting. And even in, it's been really interesting because every time we sort of address some major piece of the project, we start the conversation exactly that way. Like, what character is this? Right. And how does it relate to the other characters? And so, like we designed a whole bunch of interconnecting stairs between the different floors. And each one is different. And it's been really actually interesting to have to do that. I'm sure the contractor will really hate us in a few months, At least we tried to maintain some of the details, through it. But still, like, some of them are switchbacks, some of them are straight runs, some of them are, whatever. And then, there's always a slight shift in materiality, even if it's just like the color of the concrete pavers will be slightly different from one to the other. It's just enough to kind of like make it work with or against kind of the space it's adjacent to. So
where are you guys now in the process?
We're in DD, basically. Yeah. So construction's going to start in mid to late September. Yeah.
It's exciting.
Yeah. It's a big project.
So then you're in school. After you finished, did you go back to school again?
I did, but I worked for a year or so. I actually I worked for a contractor for a while. And, when the guy hired me, he's like, "You're not going to be working in the field, just so you know." And I was like, "Okay, that's okay." Like, he's like, I'm not letting you touch any of the tools."
Why? Because he didn't trust you?
No, because he's like, "I've got guys who are skilled to do that. I don't want you to be," and he's like, "I also don't." Yeah, and I also don't want you to be. He's like, I really don't want you to become, an apprentice in the field. I actually want you to be in the office with me, and you're going to learn like a lot of the process, and we'll go to the job site. And so I actually learned how to like cost estimate. I did a lot of cost estimating then, which was actually fun, because I'm like looking at these really beautiful projects, because it was a pretty great construction company, and they had a lot of good clients, and they worked with a lot of great architects.
In the city?
So yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like a good contractor. I mean, a good person to work for at that age.
No, it was
to
really
say
great.
that, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And then he and I think it was on Thursday afternoons, because Fridays were never a good idea to go to the job sites, because everybody was kicking off a little early.
Right.
So Thursday afternoons, we'd like get in his Jeep and like drive around the city and go to the different job sites, which was really fun too. Cause then I'd see like, you know, these like, I guess at the time, like $2 million renovation projects, which now are like $30 million renovation projects. But I'd see these like beautiful like apartments that, you know, on the one hand, like design wise, they might have been a little too like, you know, fussy for my taste, or a little too, you know, kind of traditional. But on the other hand, you could totally understand the craftsmanship that went into to kind of these things. So, but then, you know, because I guess I was also kind of helping I was like the office assistant to all of the site supers too. So that like when they needed to order something, like not like a big thing that was like, you know, part of somebody else's, you know, package, but like, you know, they need to order more drywall screws or whatever. You know, I would help organize and coordinate that. So I got to meet all the site supers too. And I got to kind of understand like how different personalities of site supers kind of affect the quality of the project. So, you know, like certain temperaments were better for certain projects than others, you know? So like the nice, calm, quiet guy was doing those, you know, super fancy renovations. And the guy who was like, you know, seemed like one step away from being an alcoholic was doing like the really fast projects that had to get done right away. So.
You see the same parallels in the design offices? Probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Oh, now you mention it.
I know.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah.
That's interesting though, because I mean, you kind of experience in education runs the gamut from like the very art end of the spectrum to construction and everything between, and even reading personalities and things like this. But you said you decided to go back to school because you needed it was a 4+2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I kind of always knew I wanted to get a master's degree. You know, it's probably one of those things that, I think, you know, my parents wanted me to have it as much as I did in a way, you know, but it was good. And I went to Columbia. So I didn't want to go to Columbia, but I did, well, because I knew it was going to be a lot of the same people that taught me at Parsons, and it really was. And so, but at the time, so I think I applied to like, you know, Harvard, Columbia, and Yale. And
only the best schools.
I know. Well, yeah. So
wait, so why did you go to Columbia if you didn't want to go?
Well, no, here's the thing. I didn't want to go at first.
Okay.
But what happened was that I wanted to go to Yale because Bernard Schumi was teaching at Yale. And I was like, oh, that's perfect. It's great. It's going to be great. It's going to be fantastic. And then, of course, he got hired to be the dean at Columbia. And I was like, God, I really wanted to leave New York. But, you know, this is such an amazing opportunity. And it turned out to be, I mean, that was actually what did end up changing, was, you know, Bernard starting, because it was, you know, it was a good school. It was, you know, Jim Polshek had run it for a long time. And, you know, there were some, you know, he brought on a lot of big names of that era, you know, but like when Bernard showed up, he was suddenly like, I'm just going to have my friends come and teach here.
He kicked everyone out from what I understand.
As many people as he could. Yeah. And it really just completely changed the nature of the education there. But of course, since my class was like a group of people who like half of us were there because of Bernard and the other half were there not knowing that Bernard had been hired.
Interesting.
There were a lot of students that I was in school with who were very unhappy and bitter about it because they had a very different idea of what their education at Columbia was going to be like. And so, you know, there were faculty who sort of fit the mold of what they were expecting. And so they became, you know, so it created a lot of weird politics at the school while I was there. But, you know, I didn't really mind that much. It was actually kind of fun to have to navigate all that in a way. And, you know, and actually like probably one of the most interesting moments for me there was when we had to do level reviews, which were kind of a new thing there. So in order to go from second year to third year, you had to have a panel of faculty review your work. So you had to put together a portfolio and present your work in like 15 minutes.
And if it didn't go well, you don't move on?
Yeah, exactly.
Really?
Yeah, I know. And so they brought people from, let's say, different camps of the school to those level reviews. And so mine was 2 people I knew really well, and I can't remember who they were right now, and Bob Stern. And
who was of a different camp.
Yes. and at the time I was like, I like went to the dean and I was like, I'm sorry, Bernard, like, really? Do I have to do this? Like, with that guy, he's going to be like, chew me apart. It's going to be horrible. And he's like, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It'll be fine. I was actually like, my theater experience coming into handy. I had been, I was the guy who did the slides and sound during lectures. Right. So I knew Bernard really well because like,
oh, nice.
Because he and I would like hang out in the sounds, like before every lecture. So we would chat about stuff or whatever. It was kind of cool. I was like, this is awesome. But anyway, so he's like, it'll be fine. Don't worry. Just do your best, And I did my presentation, and I think it was probably like Hani Rashid was on the review or something like that, and one other person. And afterwards I was kind of like, okay, what are they going to say? And Bob Stern starts first, and he's like, I would never have thought that I would like this work because it's just not at all the kind of stuff that I would ever do and I would ever allow to happen in my class. But, you know what you're doing, and you do it in a very convincing way. And like, the drawings are really nice, and like the work is really interesting, and like you really know how to talk about it, and so on and so forth. And I was just kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm hearing this. Like he was like, he was like, whatever, you're great. Right. Don't worry about it. Good. Moving on. I was like, okay. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm doing something right, because if Bob Stern can actually say positive things about it, because I kind of imagined like he would either sit there and be like, are you crazy? This doesn't count. This isn't architecture or whatever, because I was doing some weird stuff, and I thought it was pretty, but it was so process oriented. That's again, and I think that's what he picked up on. Right. But it's the thing that I was afraid he was going to be like, don't draw it like that. It's not, that's not what architecture is, right. Kind of thing. So
you went to work for him after?
No.
Well, I mean, I think that's the mark of a good critic at some level, is you kind of have to understand that, especially if you're a practicing architect or designer or whatever, and you have your own, I was going to say shtick, but let's say preferences, right? Or philosophies. That's not everyone's going to listen to and follow that.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true.
That's funny. That's a really good but, right? It's like, I would never, ever do this. But, would you say but?
Yeah. Yeah. So that was, it was eye-opening too for me. And it sort of helped me a little bit to understand also better kind of how eventually to approach teaching too, because of exactly of what you just said. It's like, you can recognize quality in anything, as long as you're willing to kind of like understand it and kind of engage it.
So at what point then did you get into teaching? Because you taught at Parsons for a while. Yeah,
it wasn't until it was like 2003 or 2002, I think it was. I started. I'd always been thinking about it. I was kind of one of those people. Like when I finished school, I was like, "Can I just slide right into teaching?" And like people were like, "No, don't. Give it a chance. Like do some work, get some skill." And so my friend Bill Massey had been teaching at Parsons. He was actually one of those people who kind of slid right into teaching. So when he had been selected as a finalist for probably the third or fourth PS1 installation project, the summer things. And so he called me up. Hey, Lex, can you help me out? I need some help. And I'm like, sure, what's up? And he goes, well, I have to do this charrette to do a presentation for this, this thing, PS1. And I was like, oh yeah, the PS1 thing. Cool. Great. I'm so glad you got that. And he's like, yeah, but I need somebody to substitute teach for me for like 2 weeks. And I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I can do that. And the director at the time was Peter Wheelwright. And, Peter was like, I suppose that's okay. Peter, I suppose. And I'm like, Peter, I worked for you. You're like, but
as long as you don't burn down the school, I think it'll be okay. You know what I mean?
So I did that, and it was like, it was maybe even only a week or so, but I was like, yeah, okay, I kind of get this. This is pretty interesting. Like, I think I just kind of babysat, really. I don't know if I'm sure I did desk crits, but I was like lost. I didn't know what I was doing. But Bill got the project. So he, ended up doing it, and I was helping him out for the summer, and I helped him with the installation and stuff like that. And he kept talking about, you should come teach at Parsons. You should come teach at Parsons. I think you'd be really good at it. Because I'm going to RPI. And so, because he was like done with Parsons, he's going to like, and so he said, well, I'm signed up, and I'm sure that they would be okay with like switching me out and switching you in. And I was like, well, let's try it. Of course, it didn't work out that way because he was teaching the grad program, but it did turn out that they needed somebody to teach undergrad. So, so I was like co-teaching with Chris McVoy at that time. So Peter basically said, I'll hire you, but I need you to teach with somebody else because you don't have any, teaching history. But neither did Chris at the time, or maybe a little bit. So he's like, you guys can like tag team this and you'll be fine. You'll make it work, So I might have taught, I think, well, anyway, yeah. So we did that. And that was fascinating. And we had a great time, and our students had a great time. And it was a really kind of good group of people that we worked with. And it all went actually really, really well. So, I got hooked,
Was the program always in that same building? Or was it?
Well, when I was a student there, it was at 2 West, but it was at 25 East. Like, yeah.
Which one's which? 25 East is the one
closer to University.
Yeah. It's close to University. Is the one that's next to, well, currently there's like a Blick Art or whatever.
Yeah, you were stuck teaching. Yes, right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, you were stuck teaching over at like 16th Street or 17th Street at some point, right?
I was always inside of the, I don't remember the addresses. Okay. I was always in the one that's next to the art store.
Okay. Yeah, that's 25.
Oh, no, that's right. I was in the other place too.
I remember like going to a review of yours, and I was like, where are you here? Who did this?
I forgot about that. But was that the same? So was it the same building that you were a student in and then teaching in?
No, I was a student at 2 West 13th Street, which was the main building at that time.
I've always wondered what it would be like to be a student and then a teacher in the same exact space, especially when it's close quarters like in New York City. Like, it's got to feel weird.
Yeah.
That energy that you carry with you.
Yeah. Well, I think that probably has a little bit to do with why I decided to move out here, was that it wasn't the same space, but it was basically, it was the same environment over and over again. And I was finally like, I really love Parsons. I really love this whole thing, but I'm so sick and tired of like the corner of 5th Avenue and 13th Street. I've just been here way too long.
So then you were teaching, you got hooked, you were practicing off and on throughout the...
Yeah. So I started my practice in 2000, and it was so focused on residential. It's funny because I think at the time, I just thought like, oh, this will just be kind of like the start of like my career, and like I'll do residential for a little while, and then I'll kind of start to do the stuff I really want to do. Right. And although the very first project I ever did, the reason why I was able to start my practice was I got to do like a workplace project for a company my brother was a partner in at the time, and I designed a really great offices for them in the Empire State Building, which is super fun, really cool, really, really interesting building to work in. Yeah, and so that was a great opportunity. It was like a really, really nice way to get things started, and so I kind of thought like, oh well, that'll launch that part of, that'll be kind of my venue. But then of course, you get the hey, I have a 1-bedroom apartment. I need to like fix the bathroom. And I'm like, great, that'll be fun. And then like 10 years later, you're still doing bathrooms and kitchens, and you're kind of like, oh God, I can't do this anymore.
That's the tough thing with New York City, right?
Yeah.
Especially if you're on your own and you have like a small practice, one man shop or 5-person shop even,
right?
Or 20-person shop.
Even
there's a day out,
right?
15, 20 years. I mean, there's a ton of that work.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like there's not a whole lot of ground up for smaller firms,
right? Yeah, and I did get to do some pretty sort of like a design. I did a renovation of 2 like existing buildings on the Bowery, just north of Houston. That and it was a 3-story building. We excavated a basement and kind of like we completely gutted it, so they were like as close to ground up as possible. But they were in the landmark district, so we had to keep the facade kind of pretty much intact. Mm-hmm. Although we did do like this transformation of the top floor. Basically, it was great. It was like one of those really like wonderful opportunities where the building code requires you to break the landmarks requirements, right? So because the windows were too small to make it residential, and so it was like, sorry, we got to get more light and air in there. So we did a big ribbon window across the front, which is pretty cool. It looks horrible today, unfortunately. I walked by there when I was back, and I was like, "Oh my God, can't you guys paint?" Like the guy. Anyway, yeah, whole other story there. But that was that was kind of probably the biggest building project, closest thing to a building project. But I did a couple houses outside of the city too.
So you moved to New York for school, mm-hmm. right? And then you just ended up staying there.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, we always ask people who lived in New York for a number of years, but especially during that kind of period, like, mm-hmm. I mean, especially at the Union Square region, like it's got to be weird to be walking by and seeing, really disturbing scenes and unsafe environments to now when it's like hipsters and mm-hmm. and young kids that go to Parsons who, quite frankly, especially the fashion program, have a ton of money and they're walking around in like Louis Vuitton tracksuits. It's kind of a weird corner because of that, actually, just to see that.
Yeah.
It's like, can you give me some money? I know I'm your teacher, but you clearly have a lot of money. You want to just give me some donations.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, the only dorm that Parsons had at the time was at the corner of 16th and Union Square West. Mm-hmm. It was awesome to be there. And the dorm was like fine. It wasn't, it was whatever. It was a dorm. I think dorms today are much nicer than it was, but being kind of like that. So like when I did summer program, I also stayed in that dorm. And then, so that was 1 year earlier. So that was 1982. And basically the RAs like sat us all together on the first day and they were like, so here's the thing, like school's right over there. It's like down the street, like 3 blocks. Never walk alone.
Even though you can see it from
yeah, exactly. And I was kind of like, wow, like that's crazy. And then I realized, yeah, it's like, it's sketchy. It was so sketchy. It was like really weird. But like you also kind of got you just feel the energy right away. Like as soon as you kind of like comfortable with the idea that like, yeah, it's a little dangerous for sure. 14th Street is weird. And kind of like, once you turn off of 14th Street, it gets a little weirder. It was like, once we realized that like, if we walked 2 blocks north from there, that's where Andy Warhol's factory was. And like, you can see it from the street. And you were like, wow, there's like an energy right there. And like Danceteria was like 3 blocks the other way. And like, there was so much happening right around there that you were suddenly like, oh, I get it. Like, this is pretty cool. And like, you're willing to kind of deal with that sacrifice of like, having to walk to school in pairs.
Right. But I mean, I feel like even, your description or you're telling us about your undergraduate experience and the kinds of people you were exposed to through the school. Mm-hmm. And we were kind of joking that maybe some of these characters would not even get a teaching position or be allowed to teach now, but that could possibly be the case. And it's got to affect the education in some way, right? Mm-hmm. To have everything be much more sterile, or I don't know, vanilla, I guess might be a word.
Yeah. I kind of feel like that's what New York is. Like when we left New York, it felt like it kind of became like the same over and over and over. And I don't know if it's because it just means like you've been in the same place for too long, or it's kind of New York is just repeating itself in a way.
I think, I definitely get that. Yeah, I mean, I definitely got that vibe too. I mean, I feel like it's almost become one of the things that started to really bug me about New York is it started to feel a little bit like a kind of false version of itself in a way, like a fabricated version of itself. The authenticity of it was very different, and of course, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who I'm not a very nostalgic person. Like, I don't look at something that I thought was super cool and hip and like, why isn't it still around? Why don't people appreciate that? I get it. But on the other hand, I also wonder why does, why do certain, New York has become very trendy, which is, I think, part of what confuses me a little bit about it, that it's like people want to go to New York. And I was always like, yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, I wanted to go to New York too, but like for very different reasons, I guess, is maybe part of it. And, I'm sure that some of it, like 10 years ago, was the kind of Carrie Bradshaw effect, Right. And it's like stuff like that still. Like, I know you were asking me earlier, like, what am I watching on TV these days? I watch some super trashy television, not trashy like stuff that's meant to be trashy, but stuff that you'd just be like, that's not really meant for you to watch, kind of stuff.
You're not watching the Kardashians, right?
No. See, that's trashy.
Trashy.
No, but like, and it's not trashy actually, but I should say it's just inappropriate for me to be watching.
What? SpongeBob?
No. And it's going to sound terrible, but I don't mean it to be like, so there's this great TV show called The Bold Type. I don't know if you've heard of this,
no.
But it's like the perfect example of, I think what I'm talking about is that it's kind of like, it is kind of an updated version of Sex and the City for, a new generation. So that's part of the reason why I shouldn't be watching it, is because like, I shouldn't watch a TV show about 20 something girls growing up in New York. Like, I just shouldn't be, I'm like way past that.
I'm market for the
exactly. Okay, but I kind of find it fascinating because they have really good storylines.
Right.
But the way in which they engage the city is like, so like, it's just like they're doing all the right stuff. It's like everybody does, like, they always want to be at the right place and at the right time and do the right things. And I'm like, New York actually isn't like that. Like, if everybody did that, like, it would be impossible to do that, because there's just too many people there. And so that quality of New York, like, I think that, sort of understanding and indulging in the kind of density of that urban environment is actually what's always fascinating to me about New York, and sort of feeling like you are like always sort of, you're surrounded by people and you kind of indulge in that in a way in New York, that or at least I used to feel that way. Mm-hmm. Now I feel like I'm just like, oh God, why does everybody want to go to my favorite restaurant?
That's the issue now, especially because everything's online. As soon as something becomes known, it's like, that's it.
It's to wait in line around the corner.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, there's some kind of, and sometimes it's totally fabricated, that whole thing. It feels like, like everything's dressed up.
Right.
To achieve the line effect.
Yeah.
Whereas so in this neighborhood, there's some really good local Chinese places. Mm-hmm. I really doubt that they're on Yelp. Maybe they are. And there's a line out the door. It had nothing to do with their decor or anything that, I tell you. Or their rating, as far as like, do they even have a rating in the window? They probably don't even have a rating.
I don't think they can get one.
Yeah.
They probably don't.
Right.
Yeah, I don't.
I mean, so I don't know. Those places exist, but in a city where I think there's so many people that are so thirsty for the image of that. Yeah. It's like, it very quickly, I don't know. Mm-hmm. It's like, it's kind of a phenomenon. Like, if it exists, then it's done with in a way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had an interesting, a long time ago, probably in like 1998 or so, I was working on a project where we were engaging city planning and the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council for the project. And kind of so I ended up going to a lot of meetings and getting to know some people at city planning who were more on the kind of, visionary side of city planning. So it was really interesting to kind of talk with them. And I went to a talk once that was kind of led by this group and talking about how Lower Manhattan was developing and transitioning into residential. And, really being very specific about different areas and different kinds of conditions, but also kind of being visionary about kind of like, how do we begin to kind of structure this in a way that like allows for this growth to happen. But the thing that struck me right away was the whole entire conversation was geared towards it. There weren't developers in the room for this conversation, but the whole thing was, how do we sell this to a developer to get them to come in and buy this building and convert it?
Right.
And, afterwards I kind of talked to the guy that I knew well, and I was like, why do you only think that developers are the only people who can do this? And, isn't there a more grassroots approach to this that could happen? And he was like, no, it's just way too big. This is way too big a problem for anybody other than people with deep, deep pockets and access to very, very large sums of money to do this project. So, and I think I was living in Lower Manhattan at the time too. So I kind of like felt like this is my home and I don't want to see it destroyed by these developers. And, for better and for worse, like there's been all kinds of like starts and stops to that process. And, I guess it's more engaged, but I actually always loved the idea that like at 11 o'clock at night, I could walk out my door and there was nobody there. I actually kind of really liked that. So it was that contrast of like, being, if I want to be like in a crowded place, I can. If I want to be like, feel like I'm in the middle of nowhere in like one of the densest parts of the city, I can also do that and enjoy it. So
it's a weird area because of that.
Yeah.
I guess it's changing, but still it's kind of, it feels like you've entered a movie set. And it's shut down or something. It's not actually a real city anymore. It's just like these buildings are there for the facade of it or something. I don't know.
I remember the first year we moved to New York, I was looking for a job. So I met with an architect who was teaching, I think, at a coffee shop. And he said something to me that at the time I was like, yeah, sure. I don't really get it. But he said New York is like a Disneyland for adults. And I was like, okay, I don't really know what that means.
I said that.
Yeah.
No.
I'm pretty sure
we probably did too, because you talk about Disney all the time. But he said that,
everything
and I was
is a theme
like,
park to me.
okay. Well, basically, it's a giant playground, and it's not real, and you only see that once you get out of it. And I was like, sure. And now that we're out of it, I'm like, well, I could kind of see that in a way, right?
Well, I think it's real. What do you mean it's not real?
It's easy to just stay there forever. Like it functions within itself, kind of ignoring the world out there.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
it's very much.
It's like autonomous.
Way. Yeah,
and the fact that it's an island is also emphasizing that.
Yeah. But that was actually that's a really interesting thing, and it's kind of the thing that's always made it hard for me to understand how you can live. Now that I'm out of New York, I get it better. But like when I was there, I kept out. It took me so long to kind of get to the place where I could say, yeah, you could live in Detroit. You could live in Houston. You could live in some other also major city and actually like have a design life. So I kind of had that like, how is it possible anywhere other than New York? Like New York is everything, kind of thing. Yeah. But it's because it does have everything, and it like so it can exist as this autonomous environment, and and it's actually kind of a fascinating kind of quality to a city that where does that scale and density kind of I guess in a way, like what's the tipping point? Where is the place, where is the moment in time when a city goes from being kind of dependent on its surroundings to a city being autonomous? And I think about that a lot, actually. And I'm not an urban theorist at all, so I don't really have an answer to that question, but it definitely is on my mind a lot, especially as I was kind of thinking, like, if I leave New York, where could I end up? Where would I end up? And what are those qualities that I'm looking for? Like for my parents, for instance, who have been lifelong New Yorkers, like they can't imagine living outside of New York because there's nowhere else that they could find like 60 different theater shows to go to on any given weekend and sort of be able to pick and choose. Like if they had to go to a place where there was like 3 different choices, they'd be like, oh my God, what is wrong with this place? So
it takes a while to transition, I have to say. When we moved out here, like 6 p.m., everything's closed. I'm like, why is everything closed?
I don't know about 6 p.m., but
in that neighborhood, 6 p.m., it's all shut down. I'm like, is it Sunday? No, it's Thursday. Like, what the heck?
Right. Yeah.
So what's your favorite thing about San Francisco? Enough talking about New York. Now that we're here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's funny.
Do you have one yet, or are you still trying to explore?
I really don't. Yeah. I mean, the easy way for me to answer that question is that like I can indulge in my other passions outside of design because I love cycling. And so
I was wondering about this. How New York is mostly flat. It gets hilly toward Manhattan, the upper parts, but it's mostly flat, right? And aside from the traffic and chaos, that seems to me like an ideal situation for biking. San Francisco is an insane place to build a city on, and then to bike in. So how? Yeah.
Well, how does that work? The first thing you learn is like, where are the flat roads that get you to the Golden Gate Bridge, right? And then cross the bridge and then ride. Yeah. And it's hills over there, but the roads are engineered. Like, there's not this like straight up kind of thing. And it's some of the most beautiful landscape out there. I mean, it's incredible to get on a bike and be able to, I mean, it's actually harder to drive a lot of those roads, and the people who do it are just, they're all stuck behind cyclists climbing the hills. But it's just, so, I mean, that was really obviously a very, very important aspect of wanting to move here. And I was very torn between LA, San Francisco, and, I mean, work kind of pointed me here rather than LA. I think I would have, I like to think I would have been happy in either place. But then on the other hand, like, I think that, the little bit that I've kind of gotten involved in terms of like professional organizations and stuff like that, like I haven't joined the AIA, for instance, so I have no idea really what they do, but I do feel like, there's a sort of earnestness and sincerity in San Francisco,
which is different from
New York, in that I feel like people really want to support each other. There's a different kind of, like, I got so used to the kind of wonderful, edgy competitiveness that exists in New York that I really always loved and enjoyed, but also found it incredibly frustrating sometimes because you actually couldn't have a conversation with someone because, like, you had a run-in with them 3 years ago about like some design issue. It's just like, oh, I'm never going to talk to that guy again. And literally that happens, right? But also because it's a big community, like, it's fine, Whereas here, I feel like, the few like things that I've been to, like, through either IIDA or, or AIA stuff, I actually see the same people pretty regularly. And I'm like, it's a really small community. And, I've always kind of liked that, I mean, I've always been like, the high school I went to, for instance, we had like 70 people in my graduating class, so I'm used to these sort of small scale environments, communities inside of communities kind of thing. And I think in New York, like, it felt that way because the architecture world is pretty small relative to the city, and it kind of gives you a world to live within. But here it feels like, it's just a much tighter community, I guess, and I'm still finding my way through that and kind of trying to understand that, and also trying to understand, if you ask me today, like, am I going to stick with this job forever? I'm like, yeah, of course. Like, why not?
Yeah,
it's
because
a great
you're being
place.
Recorded. So.
Right.
But just between us.
We should say, for record, off air, we've talked plenty, and it sounds like an awesome firm. So.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's super great. And, there are aspects of running my own firm that I'm so happy I don't have to do anymore. And that's kind of part of it too. I feel like, again, like within the studio, there's kind of a tightness and also, I mean, everybody has a role. And so like, I don't have to do the things that other people need to do, and I can help or whatever and kind of move it along. But I think that in general, the sense I have of the San Francisco design community is that it's relatively small, but it has a lot of influence. It kind of moves beyond its borders. But the things that one of the things that our client in LA says to us all the time is like, there's so much San Francisco influence in your work, but also in LA. There's like, they can sort of sense and see the difference, I guess. And I guess, I don't know. I don't quite yet get it yet because I don't know like what is Northern California design, in a way. And I would say that Primo would never say that we're like Northern California design. I think we're just like good design. So, but it's definitely different from New York. It's definitely different.
What was your exposure to California before moving out here?
My brother moved out here in like 2000, so I'd come out pretty regularly to visit. Yeah, the NorCal SoCal divide is an interesting one, and it's like there are for sure a lot of actual differences that are well ingrained in those different communities, but some of it's also fabricated and kind of just for fun.
Oh, hella differences. Hella differences.
Yeah, I hate that word. That's a stupid fucking word.
I know you say it to upset people.
Yeah, right.
It's so annoying.
I know.
But it's like, the kind of rivalry is for the most part a fairly amicable one. Mm-hmm. It's not a serious thing. Like for a bit of time, there was like, there's a discussion of California being split into two states. That's never going to happen.
Right,
People are just fucking around.
Right. Yeah.
But I think there is something about New York City where it is a very competitive environment, and you get used to it, and it's like it's thrilling, but I suppose at some point, after you go through enough of it, you do start to wonder how much effort is going toward just that activity, which is not necessarily productive for anyone or for you.
Right.
And if you can put that energy toward, I don't know, anything else really. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, the progressive nature of San Francisco is also, I think, interesting and appealing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's interesting, kind of, I just building on that comment about New York, that it's almost like, there's a tendency that people have towards chaos. Like there's this desire to sort of like influence the process by kind of messing it up, screw it up. What can I do to change? How do I, and in other words, change is like about, creating a crash, creating a destruction, that's definitely not the case at least in kind of the way that we interact with most of our clients. I find that everybody's trying to be as productive as possible. Everybody's trying to kind of, move things in the same direction. And it does help give a stronger voice to the designers in a way that I find actually really fantastic, in that the clients are typically more willing to let you do what you need to do because we need to get it done next week. Right. So they're not kind of like as disruptive of the process as I feel like a lot of clients in New York tended to be, that they were like, it was never, it was never right. Every step of the way, it was never right. Right. It was like, there was always like that sort of questioning of, the ability of the architect or the designer to kind of get it right. Whereas I feel like a lot of what happens here is that, and it might also be, you talked about the kind of progressive nature of San Francisco. I think that there is a desire to kind of, appear to be kind of, on the cutting edge of whatever, and that desire to do it too, and not just to sort of seem like you are, but to in fact be a part of that and be engaged in that. And so the challenge that we're often given by our clients is, to kind of, how do you get one step further? How do you get one, they're always sort of pushing us to be more and more, inventive and more,
like ahead of the curve.
Ahead of the curve, right. Yeah, exactly. And, and one of the reasons why people hire O+A is because we've done that kind of consistently. And, it's interesting to see how a lot of the things that have become norms in workplace are things that O+A was very much at the forefront of kind of developing, for better and for worse. Like, there's like tons of places to just chill in the office. So you don't sit at your desk, Exactly.
Take a nap.
Cold brew, kombucha, beer.
Cold brew, kombucha, and beer. Right, exactly.
Those are the three. But do you feel like that's because of the way the designers and design community function, or the way that the clients tend to function?
I think that the clients ask a general question, often where, what can we provide to our employees that will kind of, it's about, they come to you with the basic question like retention. What's our best approach to kind of keeping people happy, keeping people working, keeping people in the office, but doing it in a way that is humane, right? And to kind of address that, I think in the early days of tech, I think it was free snacks. Right? Make a nice pantry that people will want to like go hang out and and then maybe we'll even, how about an espresso maker, and it kind of starts to grow from there. But so at first it starts out as like accessories, right? And then, but as you start to kind of develop those ideas, you start to realize like it's the space that those things happen within that becomes more interesting. And and as especially in tech, I don't understand how work happens in tech really, but from what we do, it seems like there's a lot of collaboration that has to happen. There's a lot of heads down work that has to happen. So you've got your desk and, you put your headphones on and there's not some gabby guy on the phone because you give him a phone pod to go talk on the phone in, right? And so, within the kind of like, open office environment, it's actually very quiet now. It's not what we used to think of it as. It was like a call center, where everybody's on the phone all the time and there's always some loud guy who's like yelling across the room and so on. It's actually super quiet because where everybody's having those conversations is either in like the town hall, like where the snacks are, or you create these rooms for them to kind of go to and to have loud conversations or just have their, collaborative discussions about like why the code isn't working or whatever it is they're talking about.
Because for a while it seemed like the open office was the thing to do, and it became almost a trend. And then there's always articles out there discussing that it's terrible for these kinds of reasons. Yeah, it's counterproductive. It's distracting, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I think that what we've been able to do is to really kind of like pinpoint the places, the ways in which to provide enough alternative workplaces that the open office itself is really just a home base. It's like homeroom, and in fact, like, one of the things that we do on a lot of projects now is we don't make like giant open office spaces. We make neighborhoods. So, it could be like as small as like 30 desks in an open office area, up to like, 60 or 70, right, but not like 200. So it's not like one big, huge open space. And that helps a lot too, because it also makes you feel like, you have a little community that you're a part of within the overall office. And it might literally be like your team or whatever. But it kind of creates that feel like, it's like your team, your group, it's like smaller scale. And then, right, as soon as you like need to like get away from it, you can go to, 5 other places and like have a different experience.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
One big room with 200 desks sounds really depressing.
Yeah, no, exactly. But that's exactly what that is. That's the cliche of the open office.
That's the open office. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Is there a lot of clients you guys have who are in the tech industry, being since in the Bay Area?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's like the assumption.
One of the first like big clients we had was Facebook.
Oh,
and so, and the way that Primo, when he talks about the origins of the firm, they were bigger than we were, but not by much, at the time. And they were in like 4 or 5 different spaces kind of scattered around in different buildings. And it was their first opportunity to consolidate into one space. So, as a client, I think, again, I don't even think they were public at that point. So they just, they didn't have any money, but they knew they needed a good space, and they knew because it was an attractor, it needed to be kind of the thing that really drew people in. So, yeah. So that helped us to kind of obviously get a foothold in doing work with other tech companies. And so, and the scales, shift back and forth all the time. Like I was working on a project with a client that we were doing like, these things sound so small to me right at the moment, but like 30,000 square feet, and they were like, it's a small project for us in the office, and I was like, I haven't really done much larger than that. So, okay. But like we did Uber's headquarters, for instance. And like, there was such it's exactly what you think. It's like the culture was very bizarre, apparently, but we were doing that project around the time that they were kind of just getting into their next big round of financing. So the project, the budget was good, and it was a really nice project, and it's pretty cool. It's actually a really beautiful project. But now they're like moving into one of the new buildings that's being built by the new basketball stadium. So I still don't know my names of these neighborhoods in this town.
Yeah, we
it's called like China Beach or something. I don't know. I think that might be right, actually.
I have no idea. I kind of wonder if the people here and the clients are more open to the idea of letting the hired architect do their thing, because maybe it's a recognized way of have the process working for like the tech industry. It's like, you do your thing, do something really cool. I'll tell you when I want it to be more interesting, but for the most part, I'm not going to meddle in it too much.
Yeah.
Because we've seen other industries and other specific businesses be successful in that way. Kind of let it incubate, and then we can talk,
right.
As opposed to being so aggressively hands-on every step of the way.
Yeah, and they also don't necessarily know what they actually want or need. Right. And so, they kind of come to you knowing that you've had a successful kind of track record of helping other tech companies kind of grow into that. It's also certainly, in some cases, about the brand. I think that one thing I do know, and these percentages I'm just making up, but they make sense to me, is that Gensler probably does like 50% of the interior office space in the city.
Wow.
And then the rest of us pick up the rest of the crumbs, in a way. So, and that just kind of makes sense, because they kind of have they don't, I don't want to say too many.
Way.
It is, yeah.
They feed you like details to fix,
Well, that's true.
In a few years. So it's like...
But I think it's also like they part of, I think, what where their capability lies is in just getting stuff done. They're really good at getting projects done. And one of the things that I've learned about working on a project after Gensler has worked with the same client is that some of the feedback we get is
constructive.
How come you guys aren't working fast enough? It's
right.
and our response is like, because we don't really have all the answers we need from you. And they're like, yeah, but like Gensler is like they would have been done with CDs by now, or whatever. And we're like, yeah, I mean, we could work that way. We could really do that. We could totally just like say like, okay, you're a client. How many people do you have? Great. Thank you. I'll see you in 3 months. Here's the drawing. Right. And it's, takes a lot of headaches, I mean, it has its own headaches, but you're sort of like thinking about it in a slightly different way. But it's very hard to do that in a way. I think everyone I work with just can't, like it's in their every fiber of their being will not allow them to do that, so I'm like, great, fantastic, like another stressful week because we're working so hard to make this perfect for everyone, but I
guess it's a mental switch for the client. But I also think that you need firms like Gensler, right? Because someone has to, I mean, it's kind. I mean, I was going to say Gensler is like the McDonald's of, which is probably a little unfair. Maybe like In-N-Out or something.
Yeah,
like right. A mass production, decent quality,
decent
good
quality
stuff.
Right,
but it's not going to be. What would
revolutionary?
Huh?
Yeah, it's not revolutionary. Right.
I was trying to think of the burger joint that's would be the O+A in the situation. If In-N-Out is Gensler. I don't know what that would be. Some local place.
Yeah, right. Well, actually, it's funny. Actually, I did do this analogy once, but it wasn't about burger joints, but it was about grocery stores. Like they're the Whole Foods. They're Whole Foods, and we're Buy Right.
Buy Right.
Yeah, Buy Right is this great little, like, there's like 2 or 3 of them in the city, and they're like everything is organic, everything's perfect, but it's not perfect like the way that Whole Foods tries to make everything perfect, where like, they throw away so much food because it like has a little tiny blemish. It's perfect because it's like, it's curated, and I think that's a big term we use in the office a lot, is like, we talk about like, how are we curating this project? Like and I think that's a really important kind of aspect of it. And it's funny because I had never thought of using that term relative to design until I started working at O+A. And then it started to make so much sense to me, because if you go to a Buy Right, well, do you know where Tartine is? Okay. Anyway, it's all kind of in the Mission.
Okay.
They're kind of very close to each other. When you go to a Buy Right, you walk in and you feel like you're walking into an old, like 50s era grocery store. And then you start to look around and you realize, yeah, it has that feel, but like everything is like, the oranges are from Petaluma, and where everything's from.
Right.
It all costs $1 a pound more than you expect it to. You look in the, like, the deli counter, because it has a deli counter and they make sandwiches and like, everything's like the way it should be. But it's all like, the salamis from like these super fancy, salumerias, and like everything's like very well curated. And like, you realize that like, yeah, that's exactly, it's like, if you think like, what should a grocery store be? A neighborhood grocer, that's Buy Right, right? Everything's kind of amazing. And it's all like incredibly well resourced and like really thought through. And you kind of get the sense that like, every month they sort of rethink things and they come up with a new idea and a new plan and they move stuff around a little bit, and like, it's always different. Right. Whereas with Whole Foods, you know exactly what you're going to get, you know exactly where it's coming from. Each Whole Foods might be a little more specific to its neighborhood and so on and so forth, because I know that's kind of part of their culture. But essentially you get it. You walk in and you get it. Right. So I think that's that was my, I did run through that once.
We'll have to expand this thought process to other firms.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, let's get some food.
All right. Sounds good.
So yeah, thanks for coming over.
This was
my
cool. Pleasure.
Yeah,
it was great fun.
Cheers. All right, so we're at the end of the episode. Before you disappear and shut off the podcast or skip forward, we do appreciate all of you listening, and it would mean a lot to us if you could leave a review in the podcast app. I know those are hard to come by because it's kind of a pain in the ass, but that kind of support means something to us, and also how well this show does in the larger scheme of things.
And even if you're not in the US, still feel free to leave a review, because review works per country. So if you want the podcast to become known in your country, leaving a review would really, really help.
And reach out to us via email, social media, and I don't know how else you would get to us, really.
Instagram?
Yeah, that would count as social media. And let us know if there's something that we should be talking about, issues or topics that you want to be covered, or if there's someone that you think we should be interviewing, and we'll see if we can make it happen. Anything else? Nothing. We have a website. Go there. It also has all of our previous over 120 episodes at this point.
Yeah, no, for sure, go there. And I think if you are a regular listener, you should really get in touch with us and kind of, let us know what you like and what you don't.
Yeah, we're very lonely people.
We have nothing else to do in our lives but waiting for emails from our listeners. So please do that.
Yeah.
And it's a free platform, so we're free to talk about whatever you guys want us to talk about. So feel free to reach out.
All right. Thanks everyone for listening, and we will talk to you again next week or sooner. Bye.
Bye-bye.